Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Construction Cast. This morning, we're going to be looking at how you win business around the world. I'm joined by two experts in business development who have worked all over the place to share their experience and their knowledge with us this morning. So without further ado, I'll introduce them both. So we have Holly Gavaghan, who is Director at Accuracy. She has worked in the legal sector for over 25 years, qualifying as a solicitor at Evershed Sutherland in 1996, worked in-house at a construction company before becoming a senior clerk in 2003, then a CEO and holding a number of business development roles within London-based barristers' chambers. She now supports business development at Accuracy. Owen has worked for 20 years in the international arbitration sector, working with leading law firms, lawyers, arbitrators, mediators, barristers, and arbitral institutions worldwide. He has managed the international arbitration department of two of London's leading commercial sets of barristers' chambers. His network is global, including the UK, Middle East, North Africa, and pretty much everywhere you can list in the world is on this list of places Owen has worked. So both of our guests this morning are well versed in the topic we're going to be covering. So winning business internationally is something we're often asked about. How do I enter new markets? How do I build my network somewhere else? That people quite often spot places that they think are going to be the next big thing. Holly, coming to you first. How do you identify emerging markets? What do you look for as a sign to think about perhaps we should be looking over here or looking on this side of the world? Is it a case of everyone's going there? Can that be a red herring?
Thank you, Annie, and thanks for the invite to join you this morning. I'm going to start by, as you say, my origins were as a construction lawyer, which means I've had a view of the construction market for about 25 years. I've had several attempts at breaking away, but I've always come back to it. And when I talk about construction, I mean it in the very wide definition of complicated structures, which can range from tall towers to an LNG jetty. And obviously, a lot of that work can be international in nature. I worked at Freshfields for a few years, and that was my introduction to investment arbitration, which is another facet of what I focus on. So when I'm thinking about emerging markets, I'm looking at countries, sectors, and using an existing skill in a new market. So taking countries first, a country that's flagged its intention to undertake a large infrastructure program or project can always be interesting. Large-scale projects have components that benefit from external advice or can lead to arbitration. Joint ventures with multiple nationalities, building complex structures with interdependence between contractors. The Saudi Vision 2030 plan, which was actually announced in 2016, would be an example of that. You have the Australia infrastructure plans produced in 2019 and 2021. You have countries that you would look at that are producing traditional energy, such as oil or mining, fossil fuels, and those countries that are investing heavily in new renewable energy sources. All of these would be places that you would be interested in doing a bit of research on. Investment treaty arbitration, which has a growing construction caseload based on the latest ICSID stats, you'd be looking at changes in government regulation and governing party, which may produce a flow of cases involving a country. In preparation for this, which it's always a good thing because it makes me look at recent stats from the arbitral institutions, and all 9 of the ICSID North America cases in the 2024 stats involve Mexico. So clearly a flow of work coming involving Mexico as a party. So I'd said countries. Secondly, I'd look at sectors that are emerging. I've mentioned renewables. Something else that seems interesting at the moment is nuclear small modular reactors. ESG disputes are of interest, and looking at where those might be arising. I mentioned replicating something in a new market. This is more on the advisory side, but PPP projects. Obviously, the initial projects were in the UK. I know because that when I was still a lawyer, that was part of what I've worked on. But those are being replicated in other countries. Probably, I would also look at where law firms are opening offices. And having conversations with lawyers and experts about trends they're seeing on the ground. There are actually a lot of foreign qualified lawyers practicing in England and Wales, and speaking to them about what they're seeing back in their home jurisdictions is always very interesting. I mentioned the arbitral institutions, their statistic reports, because those can show you trends. It's a little backward looking sometimes, but disputes don't disappear in a year or two. So seeing where the trends are there is always interesting. And I would also look at resources like GAR and Jus Mundi, which can be very helpful in understanding what's going on, particularly in arbitration, which isn't always very transparent.
Brilliant. And Owen, when you start looking at a new country or region, what's your strategy? How much research do you do, and what kind of research? What intel are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thrown in the deep end in that respect. So in the first strategy was, where are the cranes gone? So in 2008, when the financial crash hit, it was, right, 90% of the world's cranes are in Dubai. So off we went. And was thrown on a very steep learning curve of cultures, disconnect between offices, and Holly will resonate with this, just because someone's your biggest client in London, and you walk into their offices in Dubai, it doesn't mean there's a good relationship there. And that was quite I was quite surprised by that. Cultures, different offices, payment terms, etc., was something we had to learn very quickly. But in terms of strategy, when we were opening Arbitra, we were looking at gaps in the market, and Arbitra hit two gaps. The first, providing infrastructure for people stepping away from conflict hours, law firms, GC roles, etc. And then looking at how we could help law firms and the problems they had. So listening to law firms about their frustrations and how arbitration and mediation had just kind of morphed into just another form of litigation, and people had forgotten that there were two commercial parties looking for commercial dispute resolution, and it wasn't just another cog in the wheel of litigation, for example. So we started our journey. Firstly, the first strategy was listening to people's kind of war stories, frustrations. We knew what frustrated people, so we addressed those. And again, that's very different in different parts of the world. If you look at adjudication, here we saw on the last podcast with Jonathan and Matt that adjudication has been a big success here. Has it been in other parts of the world? If you look at Australia, no, it's been the opposite. The variation of rules has sent people in an opposite direction. So when we're looking at different markets, dispute boards have been very successful in that part of the world. Dispute boards should be more successful in other parts of the world, but have they been? No. So again, we spend some time kind of educating GCs in relation to those. So again, as Holly mentioned, the institutions are very, very helpful in terms of what sectors, the different types of disputes arise in, and that is, having good relationships there is live data, and obviously seeing the appointments come in. We are constantly harvesting information from law firms, as Holly says, but again, we look kind of 4 years in advance. So yeah, whilst everyone's heading to a particular part of the world at the moment, and we are on some dispute boards there. When are we going to become busy there? Certainly a few years off, but we want to place ourselves so we're familiar, so the relationships are built. So when the time arises for people to engage and look for tribunal, then we're at the forefront of their mind in relation to that. I think on-ground intelligence is also essential We can all read the reports, speak to the institutions, but actually going somewhere and seeing the cultural differences, how law firms operate, is essential. Aligning yourself. Again, our strategy was to speak the same language as the clients that were using us. And again, I think that's kind of, certainly from where Holly and I come from, our backgrounds, I think people misread that quite often. You have to. When we built our website, we wanted to mirror the people that were using us. So instead of just being a construction arbitrator, are you an infrastructure arbitrator? Are you an energy arbitrator, for example? So again, strategy-wise for us was aligning with really international clients' needs in different parts of the world.
Thanks, Owen. And you mentioned there being face-to-face and shaking hands and meeting people and that being really important. But how important is it to have people on the ground? Do you need to open an office and employ staff before you get the work, or can that come afterwards?
Is it essential? We're quite lucky. We have over 30 arbitrators, and they're kind of strategic based all over the world. So we have these kind of outposts, and we have physical offices in Washington and Abu Dhabi. It's not always essential, but it certainly accelerates and builds relationships, and you get to understand the nuances of the markets. And I think clients like to use a local service. So, we opened in Abu Dhabi. We have 3 of the leading arbitrators in that part of the world. And what we learned, and certainly what I learned from being in chambers, was clients, not the law firms, but the clients like a local service. You've seen that with the success of, the DIAC rules, for example, and their uptake. So we certainly wanted to offer that local service. There's a lot you can do in terms of, if you're not there, you can still cross-pollinate. And again, whilst we were doing good work for people in different parts of the world, London, for example, we would often use that to build trust in other jurisdictions. So people are, we've got that kind of that quality check. We're trusted, and we'd get references from London or let other offices know, what we're doing for different parts of the world, which again works well. Bridging the gap with technology, that's obvious, but I think, yeah, sure, go show the whites of your eyes, meet people, but then we work on a kind of 60-day staying at the forefront of people's minds. So it may be that I'm WhatsApping or someone, or we're having a Zoom or some thought leadership, or just kind of jumping on a call to catch up for 15 minutes on Zoom, and then kind of, meeting regularly. I think strategic partnerships in various parts of the world work very well. And also aligning yourself. I see people get this wrong all the time. They go to new jurisdictions and they're like, right, who's the top 5 law firms? So, these are the people I want to work with. And I know Ollie's smiling because we saw it in chambers, and you'd have these people, the real successful people in international business development, they align with people doing a similar level of work. So if someone's Silver Circle and they appreciate that, and they align with the Silver Circle, the relationship works very well. It's when people try and work outside their league, I guess, then they don't see the same results and same repeat instructions. But I think, look, if you're serious about kind of long-term success, then investing in presence is essential. Investing in the right presence as well. Again, just kind of war stories. I've seen chambers and law firms, aspire to open somewhere, but perhaps they open in the wrong part of town, and that's a kind of double negative straight away, and it almost kind of casts a shadow over their intentions or their success. So when we were opening and working with the ADGM, who were super helpful, they wanted to put us in a kind of tower just around the corner, and I had no visibility. Yeah, I have a business card, but we wanted to be in the community. We want to kind of be as visible as possible. So we worked with them we're in the arbitration centre there, here in the IDRC. These are real life arbitrators and mediators and people in disputes. We're right in the epicentre of the disputes world. So, like the Maxwell model in Singapore, the IDRC in London, the ADGM, for example, just get it right with your location. And also, if you are going to open, I think you do have to have, don't have a kind of dusty doorknob and lights off. I mean, again, that sends the wrong message, and we've seen people do that before. You're just there to kind of take the money out and take it back to London or wherever you may be. So you kind of invest in the local market would be my advice, and give back as well. Through training, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that was it. I was going to add that about you don't have to be on the ground, but you do have to be invested in the place where you're looking to work. And as Owen says, giving back, secondments back to London, trying to upskill by working with the people in the country. That's what a lot of the law firms and the governments may be looking for. And that's part of working in that jurisdiction. I mean, I'm working now somewhere that has 18 offices, has offices in 18 countries, and that's a huge change from when I was working with barristers, where we tended to fly around and not have offices. But we still end up working very much in places where we don't have an office, because that's the nature of international arbitration. We do a lot of work in Latin America. That's run mainly out of our Spanish office, and it's to do with language skills and the technical skills. And they have the Spanish that's needed to testify in arbitrations in Latin America, and they have the technical skills that are sought after, and so they end up testifying in those cases. We had a recent award in a case against Colombia for Telefonica, and for me, that is how it works. But the people working have developed the necessary skills to work within Latin America, and they're regularly in that part of the world.
Yeah, I think those collaborations, as you mentioned, are essential. I remember we opened an office in 2012 in Singapore, and I went to visit, again, one of our biggest instructing clients in London. I went to visit their Singapore office, and I walked in. It's a 29-year-old, and there's the senior partner lined up with various associates on either side, and his opening line was, "So you're here to take the food out of our mouths," which was quite interesting. Was quite taken back by it. And making sure your message in local markets is clear is essential as well, and your intentions. And we ended up collaborating and seconding with that law firm, and it was a happy relationship in the end. But did it get off on the right foot? No. And I just took for granted that, we've got this great reputation in London and we're working with them constantly, but does that travel? Sometimes no. So I think letting people know why you're there and how you can collaborate and complement, and you're not there to steal work, is also key to a warm reception.
Yeah. So, Holly, you mentioned there about languages and how, it makes sense for the Spanish office to work with Latin America. But another big difference, obviously, when you're working internationally is culturally. And we see that even between London and the UK, or the UK and Ireland, places that are quite close, there's a big cultural difference in the way they do business development. So that's before you're even looking at the other side of the world and you're looking at working in the Middle East or Asia or Africa, somewhere that perhaps you're not used to the culture at all. How do you navigate cultural differences when you're on the other side of the world and perhaps less familiar?
So for me, wherever you are, business development is a mix of research, a bit of geeky analysis, but ultimately it's a people business. And in professional services, people are buying people. So wherever you are, there's a lot of value in being well informed but authentic. I don't think you can build a relationship with anybody if you can't be largely yourself. And if you can't largely be yourself, then it's probably not someone you're going to build a relationship with. And that's a good point to take on board. There are cultural differences. I was trying to come up with some examples, and it actually brought me back to a book that Kim Tasso wrote in 2020, Essential Soft Skills for Lawyers, to give her the credit. And she spoke to me because she knew I travelled for business development, and asked me exactly this point. And I look back at what I said, it was remarkably unhelpful looking back at it. But she in the book was talking about studies that had been done into cross-cultural competency. And it talked about, one of those talked about, had a term, cultural intelligence, defined as a person's ability to adapt as he or she interacts with those from other cultures. I found that the average arbitration lawyer or expert, and indeed barrister's clerk, has an international outlook. And that is one of the reasons they're involved in arbitration in the first place. I think that they have to have quite a lot of emotional intelligence often, which allows them to adapt culturally. They are giving evidence to tribunals with a variety of people on them. There's a crossover between civil and common law. So an ability to navigate and read the room and pitch either your case or your business development in the right way is something you are doing as you go along. You're adapting almost as you go along. So I think it just needs that underlying emotional, cultural intelligence. Practical examples that come up, which I'm sure everybody knows, business cards in Asia, always trying to receive them with both hands, being suitably deferential. I personally find how to dress sometimes challenge, and I don't think that's just as a woman. You just don't want to look or feel out of place. And frankly, you're often going from 0 degrees in the UK to 35 degrees somewhere else overnight, and just making sure that you're ready for that can be a challenge in itself. You want to look right when you get there. So I always end up, if I'm going somewhere new, Googling dress codes for ideas as well, almost images of what are people wearing.
And TikTok now is really good for that. I go and look at people who are doing day in the lives of working in wherever you're going, and you go, oh, that's what they're wearing.
Okay, I'll take that as a tip. That's a top tip. Thank you. I used to worry that being a woman might reduce my effectiveness in some cultures. I spent many years worrying about that. I actually now can say that I don't believe there has really been any difference between working in different countries and there has been working in the UK. It's really dependent on the individual that you're dealing with rather than the culture. I also believe that in any event, if you want attitudes to change, you have to be in the room and be at the table. So those are my thoughts around that.
I mean, do you want to add anything on culture? Because it's quite an important one, I think.
Yeah, I think what Holly mentioned about that kind of social chameleon is it's important. 1 minute you're with a senior partner of law firm, next minute you can be with a kind of on-site GC, etc. And being able to speak on the same level is essential. Yeah, I mean, cultures do vary, and there's a lot of kind of cliches around cultures as well. I mean, you can't go to Asia and you have to drink whiskey until they do a deal, or stay out late. And I think I got that wrong for a long time actually, and now I don't do stuff like that. I do alternative events, and I think cultures have changed massively in terms of business development globally. Perhaps we're seeing it this Christmas season here a bit as well. So people work with people they can trust, and if you bring that to the table and you deliver, then globally that culture works, and that's what I focus on.
Mm-hmm. So entering a new market is a big investment in time and money, because if you're flying, across the world and you're taking time out of your schedule to go and meet people and shake hands, it's going to cost you a lot of time and money. The question is, how long does it take to win work? Owen, I know the question is a bit like, how long is a piece of string? But how much should you be throwing at this, both in terms of your time investment and financially?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about finances there as well. It is a big investment on time, but without a doubt. It does take time. Money-wise, it doesn't have to. There's flexible working arrangements now. There's lower overheads if you are looking to open offices. Which makes it a lot more accessible. There are places like the ADGM who are encouraging international businesses to come in and be part of their community, and that's similar to when we opened in Singapore. Actually, when I was at 39, the government were very, very helpful in that respect. Money wise, some of my most successful kind of events and and trips have cost very little. I remember being in the IBA in Seoul, and we were encamped in one of these kind of standard hotels with 6,000 lawyers for a week. And at the end of the week, there was a big closing reception, which we've been to every single night. And I just went and bought 20 tickets to go and see the baseball in Seoul, which were like $20 each. And it was probably one of the best kind of BD events I've done, spending 4 hours with a group of people I've met that week. Do you want to go and do something different? Shall we kind of escape this kind of, grey walled room, etc., and go out and you build good friendships, and you get pictures you can share and stories, etc. And for example, that cost nothing. We spent the night eating the best fried chicken I've ever had, and creating great memories. So it doesn't have to be, these lavish parties and big kind of skyscraper offices by any means. A coffee costs whatever it costs around the world, and getting there again. Our team's very strategic. As soon as we map out our key events well in advance, we've already got flights booked for the IBA in Toronto, for example, and we got those at a good price. So again, that doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. But I think just set clear expectations, small targets to start with, and grow off of those. Making regular contact with a small group of people isn't hard. If you try and kind of carpet bomb canvas, the entire market, you're spreading yourself too thin. So again, kind of identify the firms that are doing your type of work, your level of work, and see them regularly. But be proportionate in terms of what you're investing in time, and it does pay off. Again, Holly and I saw this so regularly. I'm going to go to barrister. Sorry, it's my barrister impression. I'm going to go to Singapore or Dubai, and then come back, and we'd sit in a room and go, "Well, I didn't get any work. I'm not going back there." And you're like, "Okay, you have to kind of go regularly. Sometimes, you're in the right place at the right time, but you have to be there. You have to be at the forefront of people's minds for those opportunities to arise. And it's amazing how often you go and you actually answer a person's problem, and you walk out with instructions. And that's certainly from my experience. And from my experience, one trip can pay for 10 more trips. And that's something, I experienced in Vienna at the IBA. We picked up one of the biggest briefs Chambers ever had just from sitting next to someone at dinner. And that case ran for 5 years, and a lot of people done very well off that. So again, you can kind of justify it. Are there measurables? Not always, but, are other people talking about you in the market? Are instructions coming via that meeting you have, but you can't see that? And again, I think that's certainly... in Chambers, you're asked to report on that an awful lot, and instructions may come 6 months later, 6 years later. But again, if you put in the groundwork, they often do materialise.
I think those measurables are interesting, because, like you say, if you walk in and get a job, it's easy to go, we did that, and then we got this. But like you say, it can take a long time. And Holly, when it takes a long time, is there a point, people say, I'm not going back, I've been knocking on these doors, I'm not getting work. At what point do you say enough is enough, or do you just keep knocking the doors until the work comes?
Well, as Owen said, you have to commit, you have to keep putting the effort in. It doesn't have to always be big, showpiece trips. It's keeping in touch with people. It's seeing them when they come to London, always being available if someone wants to talk. And you have to commit for quite a few years on that. You don't build a relationship from a standing start straight away. But you do need to be clear if there's anything that might be blocking you, and that can happen. I can remember one law firm, and as Owen says, you can have a great relationship with them in one country and it's not working in another country, and that you're not getting any of their work and you're wondering why. And they're very politely not telling you that there's any problem. And then sort of 3 years into meetings with them, they do tell you there was a problem. And then you realise you keep going and you build that relationship back up. And before you know it, it's been 5 years, and then you start to see the results. But that's 5 years. But they were an important enough target that you needed to try and fix that. But it's taken 3 years to have that conversation and get some honesty around the fact that something had gone wrong. But things that can block you, you want to have done your research in the first place. If you don't have the right technical skills, and by that I'm thinking very much of lawyers and experts, whether they are in jurisdictions where they can testify, are they in front of the right kind of tribunals that will be sympathetic to the way they work. If you're not going to be, well, then there's no point pitching for that work. Languages, clearly that's important. We've touched on it. I'm really seeing it through accuracy, that the ability to work with someone in their own language makes a huge difference culturally. Even if you do most of your work in English, if you can take some of the offline discussions in their own language, for example, Arabic, it's hugely beneficial. I mentioned civil versus common law. If you're a lawyer, is it a very civil law jurisdiction? Are they looking at you as a common lawyer? We're very fortunate with you in the UK legal disputes market that we are the second biggest exporter after the US. We have a lot of global law firms headquartered in the UK. We are effectively, in some ways, following on their coattails for some of this work. Are they working in the jurisdictions we're going to? That's something to look at. Rates. You might discover that you're going into a market where your rates are just not sustainable, and that's not a reason to always lower your rates. It might be a reason to, when you're trying to win work somewhere new, you might want to look at doing slightly different deals whilst you're getting a foothold, but you don't necessarily want to change your business model and have completely different rates just to get into a market. Finally, you can come up against a form of protectionism. I'm remembering another story here I had where I had barristers a couple of whom were on the Welsh Government panel, and I had several other barristers who were very well qualified to go onto that panel, but they would apply and not get on. And then we were given the unofficial feedback that whilst this wasn't an official criteria for the panel, you did actually have to be a Welsh speaker. It was an unofficial criteria. And again, it took several years to get that feedback unofficially. So having conversations about why you might not be getting the work directly with the people who aren't giving you the work, ideally. When I go and do conversations, you want to be asking them if you can, and eventually they might give you an answer.
I think that's key as well. And again, what I kind of witnessed during chambers is people pitching and trying to sell. And, you'd have a silk that just walks in and I did this court appeal case and I'm amazing because of this. And again, it's what Holly says, have a conversation. So whenever I meet someone for the first time, it's, what's working for them, not what's not working. And then my pitch will follow. And I say, I'd like to come and talk to you about, I think, how we can improve this and how we can add value to the process that you're frustrated. And that is in listening to, a client's needs instead of just turning up with a PowerPoint and trying to sell them something is much, much more effective. And again, I think Holly and I have sat through so many of those meetings where you just think, please stop talking. And let's just listen to the client. Let's not talk at them. Let's listen. And that builds very good foundations and relations.
Brilliant. So we're almost at the end now. I've got one last question for you both. I'd like to know what your best tips are for business development. And you've shared so many of them already, but your best tip and how that works in an international setting. So Holly, do you want to go first?
Oh, just my best tip. Oh, that's difficult. I had a list of about 5 here. I'm going to give my tip, which it took me years to work this out, and it's just going to make people laugh. But when it comes to networking, it's perfectly acceptable to make your apologies after speaking to someone for a while and say that you really should go and speak to someone else, and you do not have to pretend that you're going to the restroom. I did that for years. Everyone is there to network. let's accept that, have a good conversation, see what you can do for each other. As Owen has said, my other tip is ask what you can do for other people. Don't tell them what you can do for them, ask what you can do for them, but also do not feel that you can't move on to another conversation.
That's really good. It's always a difficult one, isn't it, getting away from people at an event? Owen, what about you?
I think in terms of international business development, welcome people here as you'd like to be welcomed there. And, when people come to London, we make sure they've got the best hotel rates. If they're here over a weekend, for example, we may suggest some nice things for them to do. And I've built such strong relationships that, people tell me, like, right, I'm seeing someone next week who from Rio de Janeiro who's here with his family, wants to have coffee, etc., and catch up, and you build kind of lasting relationships. I've got, as Stuart Wilkes knows, a good cycling network as well. As people call me, let's go for a ride, and spend kind of genuine time with people. So definitely, and it's amazing. I've welcomed people here, taking their families around the Royal Courts of Justice or something like that. Something interesting, and then when I turn up in other countries. It's like, come to my house, or, whatever it may be, and real kind of, strong relationships just built off of just being kind to people, extending assistance when they're coming to, a new place. Where do they stay? How do they get around? All of those kind of logistics you learn. Do you get cabs in some places anymore? Definitely not. And just those little tips, which make people's lives a bit easier, and they're truly grateful for those. And that's, one way of building universal trust, which
that's a really good point. Yeah, I've got some good relationships with people that are built on similar things, and not just here and where they're from, but sometimes we all work internationally. So you'll be saying, I'm going here and I don't know what to do, and they'll say, oh, you've got to try this restaurant, or you've got to go to this place where you can share a tip of the best coffee shop or whatever it is. And people are, again, we're all humans, and being nice to each other is part of it, and building those relationships. So thank you very much. We've gone over a little bit this morning. These sessions always go so fast. I think there's been some really useful stuff there. So thank you both for joining us. Hopefully the attendees have enjoyed it. We are taking a little break over Christmas, and we're back in January for the next session, and I'm sure Stuart will be in touch because he's hosting the next one with the details of that one very soon. Thank you, Holly and Owen. I nearly combined your names there for your time this morning, and see you all on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.